I'd like to introduce Sushant Sareen, Senior Fellow, ORF, Strategic Affairs Expert, Ashok Sajanhar, former Indian diplomat, and my colleagues Geeta Mohan and Preeti Chaudhary. A very good evening to all of you. Geeta, I want to come to you first. And to begin by saying how angry I feel at what happened. As you open the show and speak on behalf of all women journalists listening to you today, how do you describe the sentiment of how infuriated we are at this decision?
Well, it is quite infuriating because we have been covering foreign policy for decades, and not once have we ever been discriminated against for our gender. And a policy decision could have been taken on whether if see, there have been many visits in the past as well. Not every delegation that comes holds a separate press briefing. There could have been a conversation where they could have been asked not to hold a press conference separately. Should this be the rules in terms of engagement that women journalists will not be allowed? I myself, for one, because I cover the beat, and I had to engage with the delegation, the arriving delegation, kept messaging everybody. I also lodged a protest with somebody very senior who looks into foreign policy when it comes to the Afghan Taliban, a very senior official there. And I lodged a protest saying that this is absolutely unfair. But because we knew that we're not being allowed, we waited to see whether if we will be getting invitations or not, and for the press conference to take place. And there was some journalists who did turn up at the Afghan embassy, and they were told that their names are not on the list. Now, they did not explicitly spell out that they're not allowing women in, but not a single person on that select group of journalists. There are a select group of journalists that are every delegation interacts with, but not a single person on that delegation list, on that select list was a woman. And for one, I know all of us, some of us at least, who've covered the beat for a very, very long time, have never been barred from or never been part of the select group of journalists who interact with the senior delegations who come from various countries. So it was quite a shocker. One, that a press conference was being held in India, albeit Afghan embassy would be considered Afghan soil, their rules, but would be held in India, where Indian journalists are not allowed. We know what they do to women in Afghanistan, but to have them do that to us here in India was absolutely unacceptable. So yes, maybe a conversation could have been held. We do strategically require to engage Afghanistan, but doesn't mean we have to accept their rules, especially when it comes to discrimination against women. The condition that India has put to recognizing Taliban as a government, that there should be better treatment of women in Afghanistan,
right.
And they come and rub it in our face by doing it here in India.
Right. I want to take this point to Preeti, because Preeti, we as women journalists feel outraged over the condition of women in Afghanistan, of how they are deprived of the basics, and we want to bring out those stories, we want to have those conversations. And here we see the Taliban come to India wanting to engage with us, wanting to foster this partnership with us, but imposing this misogyny on us, and then the MEA saying we had nothing to do with it.
Well, Suesha, do you, me, Geeta, the likes of us feel affronted? Of course you feel affronted, but our personal grouse is our personal grouse, and really it shouldn't matter in the scheme of things, because there's a higher dynamic out there, and that is what the government would have us believe, and rightly so. This is a new world order. We need to engage. There are levels of pragmatism that we need to follow, diplomacy that we need to toe, especially in the current geopolitical situation where we stand with Pakistan. This is necessary, and we need to do it. So women like you, Geeta, and I need to stand up and look at it from a holistic, larger picture, is something that we will be told, and fine, okay. My personal opinion really doesn't matter and shouldn't actually matter. But there are two things which I feel do matter. While at one end, personally, I might feel this is a deal with the devil, keeping in mind the gender apartheid which is taking place in Afghanistan, keeping in mind what India's relationship with the Taliban has been vis-a-vis terrorism, and there's been a fair amount of hypocrisy there. But that's my personal opinion. Or, there is a whole lot which seems to suggest this is the domestic issue, including the Taliban of the country, and they can choose to do as they please because it's their domestic issue. For me personally, I might look at it, it's looking the other way when a man is beating his wife because under the garb of it's a domestic issue. So I'm not okay with it. But me being not okay with it, you individually being not okay with it, fine, okay, fine. It doesn't quite matter, and it really doesn't matter. But what matters to not just me, but what should matter to this country are two things. Yes, this press conference yesterday took place at the Afghan embassy. There are rules which will be followed as per the Afghans, because technically, it's foreign soil. They have under the Vienna Convention, there is a rule out there, but it wasn't the Afghans yesterday. The delegation came on an official visit where full official protocol was given by India. It wasn't a press conference that they were having after a preview of a possible documentary on the gender appetite they follow, or come look at our arms. I don't care. Women were not allowed. I don't care. This was an official press conference. And why we must take a front, why
Right.
I feel that the MEA is lacking, the Indian government is lacking to take a stand, is because this is our domestic issue now. Because women in India were not allowed to enter a press conference. This is not our ethos. It might be Taliban's ethos. This is not our ethos. You came in, you engage with us at a level, which is diplomatic. You might suggest that these are your rules and the Afghan embassy is yours. But, Suesha, the sheer fact that we need to take affront to the fact is women were discriminated in India, women journalists. This is not the rules we follow. And I do feel where we are lacking is to register, a dissent note, a strong, dissent with how women journalists in India were treated, because this goes against the grain, of how women are respected and treated. The sheer fact women journalists were disrespected in India by the Taliban, who were, as a delegation, our guests and our official guests.
Right.
We need to bring this up more strongly. The second issue, Suesha, that I feel is once again something that the likes of, the journalist community needs to think about is the sheer lack of the men journalists who entered the press conference. Not, one would say in a utopian world, they should have boycotted the press conference. I still actually do believe. Because if there were women journalists who were standing outside the gates of the Afghan embassy and not allowed to enter, the sheer fact, I would have hoped that fellow men journalists should have decided to boycott that press conference. Because I think it's not journalism there that you're going in to report on something, oh, you'll ask the right question. I think somewhere down the line, it's complicit where misogyny is concerned of the Taliban. So I feel a little let down by the community. And yes, did I feel that there should have been a way stronger response, or at least a response coming in from the government on how our women journalists were disrespected? Yes.
Preeti, I kept this question for you for later to ask, whether you would say that the entire journalist fraternity should have boycotted this press conference, because I felt the same. When I saw my fellow colleagues and even colleagues from the other channels sit there, all the main journalists asking those questions, and I felt, why did they not boycott it collectively? But we'll come to that point. So, Sareen, I want to come to you because you were with me on the broadcast yesterday, supporting the strategic outreach. I want to know your view on where you stand on this blatant gender bias. And if we had a woman external affairs minister, what would have the Taliban done?
I think if we had a woman external affairs minister, the Taliban would have met her. They've met other women ministers and officials when they've gone outside India. And there have been women officials. In fact, an Indian woman official went to Afghanistan on a visit and was sitting in on an official meeting. So that would have happened. Secondly, look, let me be very clear about a couple of things. I am not an advocate of the Taliban and their misogyny, right? I do not defend everything they do. And I certainly don't think that if they held a press conference in India and did not allow women journalists in, that was the right thing to do. Having said that, I will also say that it was their call. It was not the call of the government of India. The government of India had no business. For example, there have been instances, and perhaps Geeta knows of this, that Indian delegations, for example, have gone to Pakistan and they've held a separate press conference only for Indian journalists. They've not allowed any other journalists to come in. Pakistani journalists go up in, go crazy and say that how come you've come to Pakistani soil and you've not allowed Indian journalists, which a delegation makes who they want. I'm not defending, but I'm explaining it to you. Secondly, I think, there's no point uh, making, this is a bit of a storm in a teacup, despite the fact that ideally women journalists should have gone in. But there have been, to put this on either the government of India or India itself. Just, I think yesterday itself, there was a meeting held at the Vivekananda International Foundation. There were women analysts and others who were present out there. It was not as though any Indian who was organizing something had said that I will not allow women to defer to the Taliban sensibilities, whatever those sensibilities are. I don't think those are real sensibilities, but that is their outlook, right? So there have been instances where women have gone into gatherings where these gentlemen have been present, and nobody has stopped them. But that was within the Indian jurisdiction. In an Afghan jurisdiction, there are certain limitations, and both my colleagues, uh, Geeta and Preeti, have. I think they're right when they say that this was their call. Should India have taken it up with the Afghan authorities? You can take it up, but look, you have to understand where the Taliban are coming from. Incidentally, we are flying into outrage over the Taliban. There have been other regimes, including currently in the world and in the past. There was Saudi Arabia, for example. Uh, did we kick up such an outrage about Saudi Arabia? Do we crib about that if Geeta goes to Iran, she has to wear a hijab out there? Do we crib about it? She'll go and do it, right? I don't think she should be asked to do it, but she will go and do it. So, you can kick up a fuss on anything, but ideally you should. And if you want to kick up a fuss on this,
Sushant,
there is a whole
just
range
allow me
of
to ask you
issues.
a question. Sushant, allow me to ask you a question. Are you
Let me
somewhere
have
down
my
the line equating wearing the hijab in an Islamic country to not allowing Indian women journalists to actually attend a press conference? Are you really equating the two? Because if you are, then it is
Well,
deeply problematic, Sushant.
I'm equating it in the sense, Preeti, in that limited sense in which you also admitted it, that the Afghan embassy is sovereign Afghan territory. And it is their call who they admit into that embassy and who they don't. Like I said, I don't have to agree with it, but that is the way it is. That it's just the way it is,
Fair
right?
point.
And
I understand what you said, but Sushant, then the sheer fact to say it's a
tell me
storm in a
something.
teacup. What if the
don't
situation?
Indian
What Sushant? If the situation was altered, if it was a
Indian
group,
women journalists fly into outrage and Indian parliamentarians fly into outrage when you have segregated spaces in mosques, for example. Should we have segregated spaces in mosques? Should we have segregated spaces in other
Sushant,
schools and other
I think,
institutions?
to get it, okay, Sushant, should we have
You can
segregated
change this.
spaces for
Okay.
You can
mosques?
extend this
It's a
however
separate
you
debate,
want.
but
Okay, I also want to bring in Mr. Sajanhar on this, because today we stand at a point where this is about India's position on gender equality
Come on.
versus diplomacy. I just want to bring in Mr. Sajanhar on
No,
this.
allow me a second.
Okay, you finish your point. Okay, Mr. Sajanhar, I'll come back to you, Sushant Sareen. Mr. Sajanhar, this is about India's position on gender equality versus diplomacy. The ME's response saying we had nothing to do with it. This is what they sent out for the press briefing. Can this cut ice?
Well, thank you very much. Let me say that I do share and empathize with the angst that you feel, that Geeta, that Preeti, all of you have stated. But to come to respond to the question, in my view, it definitely does cut ice because, it was an event that was only by invitation. So, you can't have gate crashers in that. I don't even know whether, when the men folk went in there, were they aware that there are going to be no women journalists there? I am not so sure. I mean? These are the questions that come to my mind. Some of the things that were mentioned, maybe not by by the three ladies on this panel, that they were waiting outside. It was not a press conference to which anyone could sort of, go in, anyone could go and participate. It was not that. It was by invitation. It is something like a press conference is like a dinner invitation. Meaning, will you say that, it's only a limited number that who has been invited and the others should also be invited? Also, the point is that, as I understand, there were also very many men journalists who deal with the same, the foreign policy beat. They were not invited to that. Surely it is not, and it is their call. I don't think you can hold the government of India responsible for this. As I think Sushant has said, meaning I myself was present at the VIF event, there were women participants, think tankers, etc. And they were introduced to Mr. Muttaqi. He received them and spoke to them as warmly as he was responding to the others. So, in that sense, I don't think there was any discrimination as far as our own events are concerned. Now, that is, the press conference in the Afghan embassy. It was their call. And the Ministry of External Affairs, I don't know whether the Ministry of External Affairs would have been also aware of the guest list, that they have invited for this press interaction. The last point I want to make, I think some maybe comments have been made on this panel also, but I think by the many of the others outsiders that you have said that they were not allowed, that they were thrown out. I don't think that is a correct depiction of what the situation is. They were not invited. That's all right, but not the whole journalistic community, not the whole community that is dealing with foreign affairs issues was invited. There was a select group. There was, as the pictures
But
that you
Ambassador
showed,
Sajanhar,
there was
all
about
of
15,
us,
20 of them that were invited, not all that many.
You know,
Okay.
Ambassador, Sajanhar, with due respect, I think most women are a tad bit tired of all the mansplaining that has been going on, to use a very technical Gen Z word there. And I'd like to bring in Geeta also. Two things, sir, I'll tell you, to try and explain to us that it wasn't like that. Sir, it was like that. It was like that. There were women journalists who covered the beat for decades who were standing outside and they were not allowed entry on the basis of being women. So, we're all a bit tired of, listen, it's not like that. We're all a tad bit tired of being told that it's a storm in a teacup. Because if it was the other way around, if there were men, if there was a select group of only 20 women by invitation only, it sounds, while I say that, it sounds a bit like, during the British times where dogs and Indians were not allowed, so it was by invitation only. But having said that, a lot of, women in this day and age are treated like that. But away from all of that, I am, Ambassador Sajanhar, what happened, and I think Geeta can come in on this, because it's all over the papers today. It's been very well reported that the MEA did lean on the Afghan embassy staff to have this press conference at the Afghan embassy and not at a five-star hotel, which was the initial plan. So the MEA did lean in on the Afghan staff. Now, and Geeta can come in on that, sir.
Well, there are a few points that I'd like to respond to, Sushant. The thing is that when you say that Indians, when they travel to Pakistan, there are only all Indian journalists press conferences that are happening, and so therefore this delegation that has come can do an all men invited press conference as well. The comparison is not fair. Why? Because every traveling delegation is allowed to and does press conferences with traveling journalists, and therefore countries where you do not have very good ties with, and I remember a time when press conferences would go wild when it's India-Pakistan, and therefore to know and ensure that the right questions are asked and India is able to put its point forward, all Indian journalist press conferences are held when we travel to Pakistan. And similarly, many leaders who come to India, who travel to India, do press conferences with their traveling journalists, including the United States of America. But this is entirely different because, like you said, Muttaqi has been interacting with women. The UN head in Kabul is a woman. He's been regularly in touch with the woman representative. There are delegations who went from various countries, including India, a track to as well. And he did interact with women. So there was a point that Muttaqi was making by not allowing us in, that he could do it in India. Come, use the Afghan embassy, not allow women. That's even a bigger affront, because it's not like he's not been interacting with women. Maybe avoiding tough questions from Indian women journalists, where we would be asking him about women's rights and what's happening to women in Afghanistan. I think that, and there have been cases where Indian, and if ties are good, where the hosting country does impress upon the invited guests that might not as well hold a press conference. You can go and do it in Kabul if you have to really put forth your message after the visit. He's here for a very long visit. He's going to Deoband. That messaging could have happened. There are a lot of things where a lot of to and fro happened, including with the flag. Should the two sides have flags or not during the bilateral meeting? Should the press conference be held at the five-star hotel where he was staying, or at the embassy? The embassy still has staff from the older administration who were really not in agreement with Muttaqi going there and holding the press conference. And then there was the flag issue. They did not want the Taliban flag there, so they actually removed the poles from the venue. All that happened, and Amir was in touch with them in all these conversations. So why not just impress upon them?
Right, I'm sorry, I'm also managing the time here, and which is why I'm coming in. I literally have the last 2 minutes on the show, and I want to take this to Preeti to understand how do you see this moving forward, given the fact that this is not just about regional security, but also about the economic partnership, and given future engagements, I mean, how long are they going to continue to function like this, and with the MEA looking the other way?
Suresha, I think Sushant Sareen wanted to come in, so you must give him one.
Let me just come in there. MEA is not looking the other way. It's not about MEA looking the other way. There are strategic interests over here that are very, very important. But my limited point was that maybe they could have just asked them not to hold the press conference at all.
Right.
If it had to be discriminated.
Suresha, we've got, if we still have 2 minutes, I'd like you to give 1 minute to Sushant Sareen, because he's been wanting to come in. But, I just want to just encapsulate it. Geeta follows the beat, so she has certain compulsions, and I completely understand, that she needs to look at it from a geopolitical level, which the MEA is looking. I don't have those compulsions. I speak as a journalist, and I look at it from the point of view of, I really do think that India needs to lodge a very strong, India needs to do this. And it needs to do it because women were disrespected in India, and there were Indian women who were disrespected when they were not allowed to, get into a press conference. One can say it was by invitation. Only one thing is very clear: it was by gender discrimination. So I think we need to lodge, there has to be a dissent note. It needs to be made public, and that needs to be done immediately.
Right. Okay.
And when you talk about whether it's going to continue or not, it's of course going to continue. How many people are speaking on it? There are in this panel. There are two men who actually
quickly,
think
the last minute to Sushant Sareen. Preeti, I'm really short on time. The last minute to Sushant Sareen. Your closing remarks, quickly.
10 seconds for me also.
Okay, sir. We'll keep it short. 30 seconds each.
Suresha, look, it's a very unfair, this panel, because both Preeti and Geeta have already accused us of mansplaining. Now, anything I say will be dismissed as mansplaining.
Please calm down. Sushant Sareen, we were told, please calm down. It was by invitation only. You don't understand what happened. Now, please tell me, isn't that
Okay, 30 seconds each, please. I'm really short on time.
It's a statement of facts. It's their press call. Look, I would support you guys if it was a government of India or an Indian organization which was holding something and said, we are not going to allow women in because somebody does not like the face of women, right? I would be with you. Okay. These are Afghans who have come. We've had these things with the Saudis in the past. Let's, if you want to make a big deal out of it, you can make a big deal out of it.
Okay.
But you can simply go ahead and say that, fine, go ahead and do it.
Okay.
And okay, you're making.
Ambassador Sajjanhar, 30 seconds, sir. 30 seconds. I'm being told again and again to close the show.
What I would say that Mr. Suhail Shaheen was interviewed, and this issue was brought to his notice. He said there must have been some technical reason why it was done, but in future, if this happens, we are definitely going to invite women journalists. So I think that should, to that extent, it should mollify. When we are talking about what happens in future, I think that should really mollify.
All right.
And I'm sure the issue of the last word, or the issue of gender equality, I'm sure would have been discussed between the two countries, between the two sides,
Okay.
when they were having their bilateral negotiations.
Okay.